we'll get to where we left off last week eventually here. But let's just kind of review, all right? We're looking at these covenants. First covenant comes up where? Is that Genesis? Yeah, creation, okay? And with all these covenants, keep in mind, there's a mediator, there's promises, there's stipulations, there's oftentimes covenant symbols, okay, or representatives. So when you think about the covenant of creation, who's the mediator? God is the covenant initiator. The covenant gets mediated through Adam, right? The world's going to be blessed and filled and, governed and all that through Adam. So God has his plan. He says, Adam, you're going to help me carry it out, okay? What else is in that covenant? Let's see. There's promises, right? Fruitful, multiply. Are there any boundaries? Yeah, don't eat off of this tree, right? So there is a boundary that has consequences if they violate that. So there's boundaries for the relationship. So that's the threat. What's the scope of that covenant? I mean, how broad is it as far as what it involves? It's all of creation, right? This covenant is to all of creation. God started it all, and he said, Adam, you've got a role in all of this, which is interesting that we're going to look at some later on. We look at the covenant with the people of God, and God says, if you break this covenant, and certainly Genesis 3, all of creation suffers as a result. Not just people, but everything gets messed up as a result of it. Okay, so then we come to kind of a mini covenant in a sense, but Genesis chapter 3, what happens there? First covenant's broken, right? We have the fall, but God makes a covenant promise there. What is it? In the fall. It says creation's cursed, you're out, right? You lose the home and all that kind of stuff and the immediacy of the relationship. But God says there's going to be an ongoing in creation battle going on, but the seed, remember that? The seed will crush the serpent's head. So that's a covenant promise that God makes. He says, the day's going to come that we're going to rectify this thing. And the Apostle Paul picks that up in Galatians 3. And says, it didn't say seeds, it didn't say a bunch of people, the seed, which he references to being Jesus. Okay, and the scope of that, all creation, right? All creation ends up cursed and messed up as a result of the fall. Okay, next one is Noah. All right, so Noah's a mediator and his descendants. What are some of the responsibilities of that? I'm going to covenant with you. We're going to give this thing a restart, reboot. What are some of the covenant promises in Genesis 9?
Never do it again.
What's that? Okay, yeah, the rainbow is, again, the whole idea that I promise this isn't going to happen again. God takes that on himself, remember? All right, what else? Sounds a lot like Genesis chapter 2, right? Fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, those kinds of things. So there's a promise of blessings. Are there any threats to that promise, to that covenant? Not necessarily listed, but does it work out perfectly? Huh? No, why not? What's that? Exactly, because God makes, and that's an important point. God makes this covenant with fallen individuals. He knows it's not going to go right on their end. But still, he's faithful to covenanting. And he calls them into that, right? So the fruit of the fall still exists, even though post-flood. Okay? Got that? And then, what else do we have? There's sacrifice there. Remember covenant elements. There's bloodshed. Those kinds of things. Then we came to Abraham. Right? That covenant, what are some of the promises?
All the descendants.
Yeah, he's going to have descendants, a land, right?
Blessing.
Yeah, blessing, and the world is going to be blessed through him, right? Okay, so there's a promise out broader than just Abraham and his descendants, which is where the covenant goes wrong oftentimes with the people of God. What else? What were some of the parts of Abraham that he had to... His response to this covenant?
Obedience.
Obedience, yeah. He says, I'm going to take you somewhere. Let's go. It doesn't tell him where. Okay, but it's based on faith, right? So you have that. So he trusts God enough to obey him. What else? The animal parts. Remember we talked about that. The self-maledictory oath, where God says, "I'm keeping this covenant. I'm in it all the way, and no matter who breaks it, I'm going to bear the brunt of that. Whatever curse comes through covenant violation, whatever penalty there is to pay, God says when he goes between the animal parts alone, that falls on me." Okay? Make sense? Y'all with me so far on this? Okay, because again, you start seeing this covenant nature and you start picking up just about everywhere you read in Scripture. And with Abraham, God gets specific. The scope of this covenant ultimately is to bless all nations, but he reels it into a particular people. God, with the covenant with Abraham, says, "I'm going to execute my covenant faithfulness towards the world through a specific people. Abraham, you and your descendants, in particular, different from the rest of the world, are the means through which I'm going to, carry out my redemptive purposes and set things right again." Okay? And then ultimately that's, we see that in Exodus, of course, where that gets fulfilled somewhat, and God says, okay, you're going to be a kingdom of what? Priests, okay? And priests serve the function of? Twofold. Come on. Are we getting it?
Spreading the word.
Well, they represent God to the people and represent the people before God. That's that mediating role of priests. That's what they do. Okay, even in faiths that still have the idea of priesthood, that's still the role. Okay, they still supposedly carry out that same thing. Okay, so we are going to look again a little more at the Sinaitic covenant, which is mediators. Who's the person that gets called into this? Moses, yeah. Moses the mediator, right? And we started talking about this last week, which was lots of fun. And, God fulfills his promise. He says, "I'm going to deliver these people." In fact, the reason he does so, trying to think where it is. Exodus chapter 3. God and Moses meet, and what's God say to him? He said, "I've heard my people's cry, and I've remembered my covenant." Right? So I'm going to do something. And it's not like God, I forgot, right? That's not what it means, remember. What he's saying is, listen, what you're about to experience, what I am about to do is part and parcel of the covenanting nature that I have. I made a covenant long ago, and what's about to come, I'm going to deliver these people out of slavery. I'm going to show you my grace, and exert my power on your behalf. And all of that happens because I've covenanted with a long time ago with this guy named Abraham. Okay? That's what he means by that. Make sense to you? Okay. So let's turn to Exodus 19. And we got into this somewhat last week, right? Any leftover questions or thoughts or discussion from that last week? George said you kind of picked up some of it in the class he was teaching, those kinds of things. So, you good? All right. So, yeah, that was great. I mean, that was a good discussion, I thought. All right. So, Exodus 19, we see this. God has extended his power. He's delivered the nation. He's brought them out to this place. To what end? You got to get this. You got to get this. What's God up to? Bringing people to himself. That's the ball game for God. Anything you read in Scripture, all that God's doing, you have to have that lens. God is fashioning a people. He's calling them to himself. That's it. It just won't make any sense to you in the right sense until you get that's what God is up to. Started in Genesis. When God created first Adam and Eve, he said, I'm going to create beings that can respond to me. And so we can have a reciprocal relationship. And that's how it started. It got broken, when sin entered in, the fall, the rebellion against God. But God didn't give up on the dream or the vision. And all of the Bible is the story of What's God going to do with this mess? He didn't start it. He didn't cause it. He's not to blame with it. So, he's got options, right? He could have just smoked everybody and said, I'm done with this, I'm going to make some other creatures a little bit smarter than these rascals, right? Or more faithful than. He doesn't. He says, that's not my nature. Because God does as God is, right? So what we read in the scripture says, here's how God responds to this stuff. He's got this plan. He wants a people. He's forming them. He's calling them. And everything we read from Genesis 3 until the return of Christ is God's actions towards getting a people of his own. Okay? Make sense? Got to have that. All right. So God brings, he delivers the people, kind of does damage to Pharaoh and his army through the Red Sea, brings them to the mountain. He brings them to myself. And then in Exodus 19, let's just read the first 6 verses. We've covered this a few times. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time with it. Exodus 19. On the first day of the 3rd month after the Israelites left Egypt, on that very day they came to the desert of Sinai. After they set out from Rephidim, they entered the desert of Sinai, and Israel camped there in the desert in front of the mountain. Then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, "This is what you are to say to the descendants of Jacob, and what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself." Okay, pause. So already, God has acted on their behalf, right? They don't really have a clue who this God is. Except that, wow, he's pretty powerful. And he brought something in our lives we never expected or anything like that. And then, from that vantage point, he says, "Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possessions. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites." Okay? So, God says, all right, you've seen me act, you've experienced all these things. You're in a place now you never expected to be. You've been blessed deeply. If you want to know how to respond, he's saying, let's covenant. Let's make this a relational thing. Covenant is always relational, right? And he says, if you do that, if you respond to this, you become those 3 things, right? Treasured possessions, holy nation, kingdom of priests. Treasured possessions, what's that have to do with? As human beings. We need to go in the other room. You talk more over there. What's that? He loves you, okay? Yeah, treasured possessions. You have an identity in this world and beyond it that is absolutely unshakable. Wherever you go, whatever you think, whatever anyone else may think about you, here's what God says. You are my treasured possession. You have an identity that is so rich and abundant and real. It's unshakable. Yes?
But it is shakeable. He said only if you obey.
We'll get to that, yeah.
But then they didn't.
What?
So,
Yeah.
so we would not be considered.
Well, when they enter in covenant, they become his people, right? That covenant nature, they are adopted into his family as his people. Now, does that change their identity when they disobey? Let's just think relational now. Because we tend to think religiously by rules, which is what we were talking about last week. Relationally, okay? You adopt a child, right? And say, if you let me adopt you, you're going to be my treasured possession, and I'm going to love you, and I'm going to give a purpose to you in your life, right? And if that child acts bad, do they lose that identity, or do they just miss out on it? They don't lose it. They just miss the richness of it. And once you enter into relationship with God covenantally, that identity is yours. Now, if you disobey and break the commandments and all that kind of stuff, you can miss that greatly. You can miss the richness and blessing of that. And you will. That's the impact of disobedience among the Christian community. We can mess up our calling and miss out on the impact of this world, and we can also just be really confused about our identity. And then really struggle as a result. I'm not sure if God loves me or if I'm his. I messed up yesterday, or I got this deal that keeps messing up my life. And so we begin to question our relationship based on our performance. And that's never the case, okay? Remember, God is starting something here. All right, so this is the unique people that he's first brought to himself, okay? So he's setting up a pattern here. But once a pattern's been set, we step into it. We don't recreate it. Okay? Does that make sense? Jake, does that help? Yeah. Okay. So he says that you're my treasure. That has to do with identity. Okay, so that's unshakable. He says you will be a kingdom of priests. What's that have to do with? Our purpose, our vocation in this world. Okay? He says, hey, you exist. I'm leaving you on planet Earth for a significant reason. You are my ambassadors to the world. You are my representatives. And God says, I'm going to plant you. In fact, you study historically where Israel is relative to what was happening in the world that day. It's right in the center of everything. God says, I'm going to put you in the middle. So if anybody's traveling north or south or whatever, they're going to have to cross over where I plant you. Right? And so they're going to be those kinds of witnesses. Right?
So all was not lost, was it, between Abraham and Moses?
Oh, no. And again, covenantally, remember, these covenants build on each other. They don't eliminate each other. All right? And that's what Paul argues, and George was talking about last week when he was looking at Galatians 3. Okay? What happens first? The covenant with Abraham, which is a covenant of faith. How do I have a relationship with God? How do I enter into that relationship? It's through faith. I trust God and I say yes to God, right? So that's the dynamic. Now, the law, Sinai covenant, doesn't displace that. This isn't a new way to relate with God. It's still through faith. But what the law does for us and what the law paints is, here's what that relationship looks like when it's working right. Here's what love for God looks like, if you want a picture of it. Okay, that's what the law is. It's not how you get the relationship, it's a result of having the relationship. Okay? Big difference. Some of what we were talking about last week. We get our lives right, not as God wants them, not so we can have a relationship with Him, but as a result of having a relationship with Him. The provision, the grace, the relational faith dynamic comes first. Then we experience God's love in personal, deep ways that is transformative us, that makes us over time more and more like Him. Y'all with me? Yeah, no? Seeing quizzical faces and some heads nodding. Ask questions, because this is just so huge, I think. So you have you have an identity, you have a vocation, okay? Which means you've got a purpose, and you'll be a holy nation. What's that? Set apart. You're going to have a distinctive character, right? And so that's the wonder of that is this. God says, you know what? You know how I started way back then with Adam and Eve? Let us make them in our image. I'm going to give you that back. The holy nation is simply, we are restored to the possibility and to the call of being image bearers in the world. That has to do with character,
When I think of nation, I also think of we are a community. A nation is a community.
Yeah, nation as far as we understand political entities
Yeah.
really didn't exist
Right.
that much back then, yeah.
But we are a holy nation. We are a people.
A holy people, yeah, which who serve a holy God. And that, again, that's that dynamic. As God is, God does, but as God is, when we relate to Him and abide in Him, we become. So all those promises are there. And all those, just incredible parts of this covenanting overture from God that He gives to us. Okay? Where am I?
Verse 7.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. All right, which we did not do. Maybe I'll have you do is now. You need to talk to each other, yeah. Turn to Psalm 8. Here's in one of our study times, and we didn't get to it. But now it just seems like a great time. Psalm 8, read it through as a group with the vantage point of, what's it say about us as human beings from God's vantage point. Go ahead and do that. Just come up with some stuff and we'll come back to it. Huh?
How much He loves us and
Our worth.
Yeah.
Would you say Liz? Our worth.
Mm-hmm.
How much he entrusted us.
Yeah, yeah. How much he trusts to us, that he involves us in this, and not just in a small way, but in a significant way.
Even though we disappointed him, he still stays with us.
Yeah, this is David writing a psalm, and he's messed up plenty, and he knows the people who've messed up plenty, right? And so it raises the question. It's central to the psalm. What is man that you're mindful of him? How do you answer that?
We are created.
What's that?
We are created.
Well, we're creative, but you've got to go to the question, well, we'll never know unless we know who God is. We only discover ourselves when we see ourselves through the face of God. Because you really answer that, and what is man? Why did you do all these things? On a human level, we say, God, you're an idiot. We mess it up, keep messing up, we turn against you, we betray you, we're not trustworthy. Yeah, you give us all these things, but we blow it time and again. But you don't give up. You keep coming at us, And so you're only able to answer that question, who am I, or what are human beings, when you understand and begin to see that, say, well, who is God? He's the one who created all this, and he's just relentless in pursuit of this people. And so we gain our value, and we'll only rightly understand when we get that value because God values us. We can't create it on our own. We can imagine it all that we want to. But we have value, we have meaning, we have purpose because God has assigned those things to us. And relationally, that changes, it should change everything. Right? And this is what the New Testament says. Paul writes, somebody could tell me where. It's Corinthians, I think. Paul says, I don't look at another human being anymore in terms of flesh. I've got to see every person, not in light of my opinion of them or who they think they are. I've got to look at every human being now in light of who God says they are. And if that doesn't change your relational world, you're not getting it. And you take that psalm and you personalize it, Gee whiz, God, who's Bill that you're mindful of? Gee, what's wrong with you, But I don't get to question that. I don't get to determine that. If I'm going to rightly relate, especially as someone is covenanted with God and in covenant relation with God, if I'm going to rightly relate to him, I've got to relate to him according to the way God says I need to relate to him. Not how I feel in the moment. Not whether I think he's doing a good job or a bad job or nice or not so nice. Those are extinct factors in a covenant community. Because that's the way God relates to me. And you personalize that. God, who am I? That you're mindful of me. It's not like you don't have other things to do. Other people to tend to, And covenant is always at the heart relational. And when it comes to the Sinai covenant, this is where we get this messed up. The law is not a new way to get to God. The law is given as a roadmap. And once you're in a relationship with God and you want to know how that relationship should work and works best, this is it. It's a response to the covenant relationship, not something to merit it. See that? Okay. All right, some things, thoughts on it? Well, just take us to, who's the watchers? Do we have a watcher? I don't even have one. What's that?
Did you say you wanted?
No, if you just let me know what time it is, I don't want to
Okay.
blow past what we're supposed to be. What's that? Okay, great, thank you. Turn over to Exodus 24 now, okay? Exodus 24. Just make a right turn, a couple chapters there from 19. The mediating part of there, those chapters in there, basically give us some details of expansions of the law, if you will. Those become, it takes the big 10 laws, which, again, be mindful that God decided 10, gave 10, and thought that would be sufficient. Then this is kind of like tort law, here's some of the details about how that works out, okay? Now, chapter 24, though, we have this covenant exchange, okay? The covenant is there, they're invited in, but now in 24, we see the covenant being made at Sinai. So let's read through that and make some observations. Begin with verse 1. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Come up to the Lord, you and Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel. You are to worship at a distance, but Moses alone is to approach the Lord. The others must not come near, and the people may not come up with him." Okay, let's just stop there. What's going on there? What's that?
It's his invitation.
It's an invitation, but it's to a particular few, right? And again, this plays out because when God sets up the standards in the social life, particularly the religious life, does everybody have free access to God? No. There are barriers. God is teaching his people about himself and themselves. And the whole thing around the mountain, is basically saying again, you don't approach God on your terms, you approach God on his terms, if you want it to go well, right? And he says, he's also reminding that I'm a holy God. You are, a covenant-breaking people. And that's not something that I just lightly overlook. So remember, these covenants are building one upon the other. So God is forming this people who now are going to represent him to the rest of the world. And he wants to make sure they get this right. They need to understand who God is. Okay? So he starts this way.
Contradict the need for prayer. The requirement to pray whatever. And
Does this contradict it?
yeah.
No, this heats that up.
Okay.
That you approach God the way God says, right?
Okay.
It's not we're not in the New Testament yet, which is the covenant fulfilled in all of its perfection. Okay? A lot of the life that he sets up is the sacrificial, which we'll talk about in a minute. Okay, so you worship at a distance, and Moses in particular has this face-to-face contact, so Moses is kind of this mediator who has this unique relationship. God calls him friend, right? Gives him his name, his personal name, and tells him what he's going to be doing. And then Moses mediates that to the rest of the people. Verse 3, when Moses went and told the people all the Lord's words and laws, they responded with one voice, "Everything the Lord has said we will do." Moses then wrote down everything the Lord had said. A good guy, right? Smart, sticky notes. He got up early the next morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain and set up 12 stone pillars representing the 12 tribes of Israel. Then he sent young Israelite men, and they offered burnt offerings and sacrificed young bulls as fellowship offerings to the Lord. Moses took half of the blood and put it in bowls, the other half he splashed against the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant and read it to the people. They responded, "We will do everything the Lord has said." Remember those parts of covenant making that we talked about? There's blood, there's a writing, there's declarations of promises and agreements. See, all this is happening here. And then, verse 8, Moses then took the blood, sprinkled it on the people, and said, "This is the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words." And again, he's just teaching them, this idea of, there's got to be blood spilled, there are sacrifice required if we're going to relate rightly together. And it reminds them of the Passover, right? The lamb. Here's what's going to protect you from my wrath. Blood. Okay? All right, verse 9. Moses and Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, the 70 elders of Israel went up and saw the God of Israel. Under his feet was something like a pavement made of lapis lazuli, as bright blue as the sky, but God did not raise his hand against these leaders of the Israelites. They saw God and they ate and drank. And that picture there is one of just God extending grace. We saw God and he didn't smoke us, we lived to tell. Not only that, we had a meal with him. So there's this intimacy that's being portrayed here, okay? Which flows out of the mercy and purposes and grace of God. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Come up to me on the mountain, stay here. And I will give you the tablets of stone with the law and commandments I have written for their instruction." And then, that all goes on, and I think you're familiar with the rest of it, right? Okay? So God, there's this covenant making, I don't know, in a sense, a ritual, right? What's the word for it, George? It's not ritual in the negative sense, but, this covenant making process that God has that we see over and over again. Okay? And in this one, the covenant, it doesn't undo the covenant of Abraham. It extends it. He says, okay, covenantally, yes, you get in this relationship by faith, but here's what it looks like when we live it out together. So the 10 Commandments are like this topo map of the covenant relationship that they are to hold to when they get into the land. That will make them distinct in the world. Okay? Got that? What else does he do at Sinai? What else do they receive? Just some of the things in Exodus. They get the law, but anything else? Yeah, they get the commandments. That's the law. Okay. But what else do they get there? They get instructions on the temple, right? They get social instructions on how to interact with each other, how to deal with strangers in the land. You go on down the pike with that. They're instructed to build this thing called the Ark of the Covenant. Why do you think it's that? Why is it called the Ark of the Covenant? What's that?
Because it's God's promise.
Okay, it was God's promise, but what's special about the Ark of the Covenant? Testing your Old Testament theology and worship. What's that? What's that?
Commandments from here.
Right. The commandments were where? In the Ark. Right. There are a couple other items placed in there too. What were they? Aaron's staff, which was unique. Why? It was living. It identified Aaron as the true appointed priestly line. Right? What else? Manna. Okay. So those things are inside the Ark of the Covenant. Why? What do they represent?
They represent God reaching out to us to be his people.
What's manna represent? Specifically?
Oh, food. The food.
Provision.
Provision.
Provision, right? What's the Aaron's rod represent? Priestly line. Here's your identity, right? What do the commandments represent? Holiness. So all these symbols are exactly what God, you're going to be my treasure possession. You're going to be priest. You're going to be a holy nation. And he's saying, I don't want you to forget these. So important is this. I'm going to put them inside this Ark of the Covenant that has this lid on it, right? And then this gets placed where?
In the temple.
You're ultimately in the temple, right? In the place where what happens? Anywhere in the temple? Like, get that out of the way. I got to go get some bread. In the Holy of Holies, right? In the very central place, which is the place where? Only the high priest in once a year. What's that?
And God came.
Yes. This is the place where the presence of God shows up. You see? And when the presence of God shows up, he said, here's what I want you to remember. You're a holy nation. You're a royal priesthood, right? And I'm going to provide for you. You can count on me. You see all those things? And how God's shaping the people's understanding of who they are and who he is by doing this. And not only that, okay, what was the top of the Ark of the Covenant? Cherubim, but there's a name for it. The mercy seat. Yeah. How do we get to be, priests of God? How do we tap into the provision of God? How do we ever become holy people in a fallen world? By God's mercy. It's his mercy. It's his acceptance. And you see, you've got to go through that to get to the other things. It's God's mercy that gives us his presence. That's the starting point. You can't get into his provision. You can't get into being his, living out his identity or your purpose, Lord, without going through that. Why? What's God want? I want to live among you and dwell with you. You'll be my people. I'll be your God. Yes, these things are come, but they're not substitutes of this relationship or means to get it. They're the outcome of it. They're the results of being in covenant relationship with me. They are the results of you saying, I need your mercy, God. And, I'll show up in that and meet you there. Make sense? Okay? And then you play that out through the Old Testament. And certainly when they build the temple, they've got the curtains and all that kind of stuff. And, once a year, one person can go in and, good luck for that person, right? I'm not sure it was a cherished duty. I think we talked about some of the stories relative to that. what that meant and, you know, how terrified people were, right? And in one sense, rightly so. I mean, you just picture this covenant-making God at this point. And it's, you know, wow, God, but whoa, God, right? I mean, these people are like, don't go near the mountain, you know. God showed up. You don't touch anything. Don't cross the line, right? It won't go well for you. And so that's the idea of mercy is needed to enter into God's presence. And at this point in time, that was limited access. Right? That changes, right? Because when Jesus shows up, and the penalty for sin is not just covered over in a sense, but it is done away with, what happens in the temple?
The curtain.
That curtain that separated the Holy of Holies from all the normal people out there that never got to go around it, never experienced it, it's torn in two. Access now wide open. You don't need a special person, right? God's mercy now isn't just limited in that way. It's just like whoosh, it comes out as a flood. Okay? So these covenants are all tied together. Okay? Thoughts, questions, confusions? Express your confusion.
I guess I get confused as to the people that he meant this for were the Hebrews. So everybody else lost out, right?
No. Well, they did
I mean,
to a certain degree because the Hebrews did not fulfill their priestly function. The covenant, you know, this part of the covenant goes bad, and our covenant rule today is at risk for the same reasons. A lot of it. What happened in the nation of Israel when they entered into the land? Where did they mess up?
They worship
Two
other
different
idols.
ways. What's that?
They worship other idols.
They became just like everyone else. All your gods are my gods. Guess what? We got one plus that, but you know, we're going to look just like you, live just like you. Your gods become my gods. There's no distinctiveness that marks the people of God. And so their mission failed. And that's really the role of the prophets in the land. They're basically covenant reminders and covenant breaker reprimanders, you know. They said, you're missing, you're getting this wrong. Okay, so that goes wrong. How else did it go wrong? You see this particularly with Ezra and falling. What's that?
They didn't trust Israel.
Well, they didn't trust. Yeah, they didn't stay faithful to that for sure. And you know that was part of it, and along the lines of that, you know, this God, that God, bunch of gods, the more the merrier kind of thing, right? They broke number one commandment. What's that?
They also intermarried with those.
Yeah, they mixed it up so that, again, they lost their uniqueness, their distinctiveness. They weren't, in actuality, a holy people in any significant way. They looked like everybody else. Lived like everybody else. And so they didn't have that witness. They were no longer light and salt, if you want to put it in New Testament terms. The other place, in way they got that messed up is this. They thought it was all for themselves. They said, we can't go out among these nations. They're dirty people. They're bad, you know. They don't live the way we live. They don't talk the way we talk. And so when they got that kind of isolation mentality, they failed to fulfill their role as priests. They're no longer representing God to each other they were, but not to the people that God wanted them to bear witness to. He said, you will be a priest, not to each other, but to the nations.
But God wouldn't kill all those Canaanites.
He was clearing the land, don't forget. He was making a place to plant a people. Yeah, and again, being mindful, what is God doing here? He's creating a physical space where he can build a kingdom that will then be his priest to everyone else. And he's very patient in that, by the way. You know, I mean, he says, they're not ready yet. You know, which is an interesting thought, you know, that there can come a time when, you know, we delve into sin so much, God says it's judgment day. I've tried. You know. But that's what he's doing. He's creating that space where he's going to plant a unique people, a holy people, royal priesthood. Yes?
I'm confused because you just said that they were becoming like other people, but they also are supposed to reach out to other people.
Right. Yes.
So that that seems like a contradiction, because if they're not supposed to be like other people.
Right. But they are supposed to not be like other people in the midst of other people. The same way Jesus did, right?
Yeah.
Jesus was a holy person, but the people, the religious folks looked around and said, look, he hangs out with all the wrong kind of people. He's hanging out with sinners. What's wrong with this guy? He's obviously not a godly man. And the same thing for us. And the same thing then. They're to be a nation that lived by a different standard, different kind of relational dynamics, with a singular devotion to this monotheistic God that is covenanting in nature. But they were to be witnesses, light to people. People should look on. Here's it's the same Old Testament as New Testament, the purpose of the law and the purpose of obedience. People should look on God's people and see God's character. That's God's intent. The same way Jesus says, "You've seen me, you've seen the Father." God designs and wants this so that when people interact with his people, they get a taste of what it is to interact with God.
So they were supposed to bring the people to God. In essence, what they did was they allowed the people to draw them away.
They went to their gods, yes. They got drawn away from the true God to these false gods. Or what they did is try to hoard God to themselves. Let's just keep everybody away, keep everybody out. We're special, they're not. So, and we make the same mistakes today. What some people call holy huddles. Let's get all holy people together and just kind of put our heads down so we don't get messed up by sin in the world. We're no longer witnesses. We're failing in the, and we're still called in the New Testament priests, a priestly nation. Same function,
We're getting back to the ark.
Yeah.
The way I picture this is, like Indiana Jones. Did it have a cover on it?
Yes.
It was enclosed, like where the bread and the commandments were, they were enclosed.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, it had a lid. There was a box with a lid.
Okay, was
Box
that-
measured 2 feet by 4 feet. It wasn't anything significant.
Was that ever opened up?
Not for any purposes. There's blood sprinkled on it on the Day of Atonement. That's the only time they ever went in. Did any priest ever check? Commandments still in there? Yeah, okay, we're good.
Oh. And basically, it was almost the priest's job to remind the people what was in there. Huh?
Bingo. Priests, prophets, always saying, here's who you are. You've forgotten who you are. Remember, already Deuteronomy. What's the number one premier warning in the book of Deuteronomy? Don't forget, don't forget, don't forget. Remember, remember, remember. New covenant, what's Jesus say? Do this so you can remember. Yeah, that you are priests, that you are a holy people, right?
Yeah, in chapter 25, he doesn't say explicitly what to put in there. What he says is, put in there the testimony that I will give you.
Yeah. Yeah, the specific directives actually are found in Chronicles,
Right.
When it comes to, the other parts that go in there. So, but yeah. I mean, it didn't all happen at once. It didn't all go in there at once, but it did happen. Okay? Time, please.
7:27.
Okay. All right. And so here's a key piece to this. Okay. Again, we are in covenant relationship through faith, just as Abraham did. But our response to God is always a moral one. Always. And the reason for that is God is a person. And person-to-person interactions are always moral. We've come in the West to kind of think we could segment that, haven't we? If the person does a good job, it doesn't matter if they're moral. We have those kind of crazy discussions. But biblically, a non-moral relationship is not only doesn't happen, it can't happen. God calls us a covenant relationship, and part of that calling is a calling to obedience. He says, I'm telling you who you are, and I'm also telling you what you need to be doing. That's just part of the relationship. That's because person-to-person relationships are moral. And because God is a person and he's created everything, we live in a moral universe, like it or not. Okay? And so God's giving the law. He says, okay, we've got a relationship. There are moral dynamics. And he just kind of spells out, here's what it should look like, you know. And when you get this right, this is the way it unfolds, okay? You're not lying to each other. You go through all those. Does that make sense? Yeah, no? Okay, good. And again, we talked about this, got into it last week, but I hope it's kind of starting to gain some traction that, you know, God's grace always precedes our moral response to Him. We move in a relationship with Him, and then we start responding in obedience, you know. And that relational dynamic, we're not going to get to it today, but if you read Hosea, Ezekiel, Isaiah, Jeremiah, so often He will take the disobedience of the people and talk to them in terms of marriage relationship in particular, and fidelity and faithfulness. He said, this isn't about keeping rules. This is about relationship. He says, and he talks to the people and says, you know, you've prostituted yourself to everybody around, but you know, I'm the one that delivered you and given you grace, and you've been unfaithful to that. And so he puts it in relational terms because it is relational. Where we get faith and religion wrong is when we make it kind of a legally based dynamic. God never intended that. In fact, Hosea, he puts it in terms this. God calls out, he says, I'm betrothing you to myself. He says, that's what this is all about. He says, when you come into covenant with me, with relationship with me, that's what it is. It's like husband and wife stuff here, you know? And, you know, we're human beings. We know husband and wife stuff. There's parameters on that relationship if you want it to function right. And that's what the prophets keep reminding the people of, you know? This isn't about jumping hoops and keeping laws and getting in step. It's about a living, dynamic, loving relationship. Then that flows out in a certain kind of life. Making sense? We good? All right, where am I? Upside down, that's right. All right,
Well, let me,
fire.
why is it that we no longer need the Ark of the Covenant?
Yes, Jesus.
Yeah, and within Jesus, what is held?
Communion.
Well, yeah, but the three symbols that were held in the Ark of the Covenant were what?
Manna.
Manna, provision,
Right.
priesthood,
Holiness.
and holiness.
Right. And who ideally, where are those perfectly communicated? I think is what you're asking.
Right.
In the person of Jesus,
In the
right?
person of Jesus.
And so what is our covenant relationship now like? This is the promise of the Old Testament. Beginning with Deuteronomy, by the way. It didn't come later. He says, the day is going to come. I'm going to give you a new heart. Not a heart of stone like you got now. Not one of callous like you got now, but one of spiritual vibrancy, so that these laws, these rules, they're no longer standards out there, but they're the life that you live. You keep the law naturally because it's the makeup of your character. And so New Testament covenant is this. Jesus says what? Your relationship with Him. He's no longer out there. He's in here. I've given you my spirit. My very life is in you. My heartbeat is in you. My desire to please the Father is now in you. My power and ability to accomplish that now is in you. That's the new covenant. You know, God knew from the beginning, and the Old Testament is a living example. When you look around, the law can never be rightly fulfilled without a renewed heart. You just can't. And so that's why the whole sacrificial system's set up, because there's this relational dynamic that was there, and God knew you're not going to do it. So, but I don't want that to be a separation thing. You just need to keep coming back to me for my mercy. And so the whole sacrificial system, I blew it. My heart's wrong. Oh, yeah, what do I do about that? Pour out some blood. Sacrifice is required. Then we'll be right again. Okay? But you follow George, and you read the book of Hebrews. Jesus is the perfect high priest. He's the perfect sacrifice. He is our life. He is the new temple. All these things are caught up and perfected in Jesus, and we get to live in that part of it. Isn't that great? You just read some of these things in the Old Testament. It's a bloody mess, So, man, I would not be in ministry if that were hacking up animals. But just dramatic reminder of the seriousness of the fall and the complexity of what God is trying to remedy. Essentially, when you think about, disease, you can begin to understand normally, the depth of the disease by the drama of the cure, right? If something's real bad, you amputate it. Well, how bad is the disease of sin? God himself had to die to remedy it. It's no small deal. And the fact that, what we're reading through the Old Testament, God says, I know it's no small deal, better than you do, but I am going to remedy this. No matter what it costs. Then you understand that and you go, what is man that you're mindful of? Mindful, way beyond mindful, holy smokes. Redemptive towards him. That's why the gospel, by the way, is good news. Best news. Okay? All right, time? 35, okay. For your leisure, at some point, just going back to what we were discussing a minute ago, Jeremiah 35. Jeremiah is a prophet. The people of God, don't turn there, I'll just give you the story. The people of God, well, turn there, yeah. There's other stuff I wanted to get to, but we'll just finish with this. Jeremiah.
$32?
35. And the time of Jeremiah, the people of God, had become so enculturated, so idolatrous. God said, in fact, what God said is, I'm going to send you all in exile to give the land a break. That's what he says. He says, your sin is so messed up and is messing up with, I've tried to get you right, but at least I'm going to give the land a break. So that's right before they get in exile. And, the question is about living this holy life. And what, Jeremiah is wondering, how can, this is crazy. How can we do this? And God says, go visit the Rechabites. And that's what this chapter is about. And I'll just start at the beginning. This is the word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord during the reign of Jehoiakim, son of Josiah, king of Judah. Go to the Rechabite family and invite them to come to one of the side rooms of the house of the Lord and give them wine to drink. So I went to Jazaniah. That's a good name. I should have read that when I had kids. Son of Jeremiah, the son of Habazaniah, and his brothers and all his sons, the whole family of the Rechabites. I brought them to the house of the Lord into the room of the sons of Hanan, son of Igdaliah, the man of God. It was next to the room of the officials, which was over that of Messiah, son of Shalom, the doorkeeper. Then I set bowls of wine and some cups before the Rechabites and said to them, drink some wine. But they replied, we do not drink wine because our forefather Jehonadab, son of Rechab, gave us this command. Neither you nor your descendants must ever drink wine. Also, you must never build houses, sow seed, or plant vineyards. You must never have any of these things, but always live in the tents. Then you will live a long time in the land where you are nomads. We have obeyed everything our forefather Jehonadab, son of Rechab, commanded us. Neither we nor our wives nor our sons, daughters have ever drunk wine or built houses to live in or had vineyards, fields, or crops. We have lived in tents and have fully obeyed everything our forefather Jehonadab commanded us. But when Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, invaded this land, we said, come, we must go to Jerusalem to escape the Babylonian and Aramean armies. So we remained in Jerusalem. Then the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah. This is what the Lord Almighty says, the God of Israel. Go and tell the people of Judah and those living in Jerusalem, will you not learn the lesson and obey my words, declares the Lord? Jehonadab, son of Rechab, orders his descendants not to drink wine, and this command has been kept to this day. They do not drink wine because they obey their father's command. But I have spoken to you again and again, yet you have not obeyed me. Again and again I sent all my servants, the prophets, to you. They said, each of you must turn from your wicked ways and reform your actions. Do not follow other gods to serve them. Then you will live in the land I have given to you and your ancestors. But you have not paid attention or listened to me. The descendants of Jehonadab, Rechab, have carried out the command their forefathers gave them, but these people have not obeyed me. Okay, I'm going to stop there. But, what he says, here's all the people saying, we live in a foreign land, and, what's the big deal? And God says, just go visit these people. Generation after generation after generation. They live in the same land you live in, but they have stayed faithful. And he says, don't you get it? And he's calling them into that. Say, this matters. And as a result, if you read later, that family line are blessed and protected where everyone else goes out into exile. But, God's just saying to them, we are to be holy people in an unholy environment. That's the way it works. That's the way it's intended. He says, but it's important. It matters that we do, live out those holy lives. The way that God should reflect in how we live. That's what makes us a light. That's what makes us salt in this world. Okay? So the same thing, That relational dynamics. Okay, good. Just think generation after generation, generation. You think anybody was tempted along those lines? Sure. Say, no. We've covenanted, So we're going to hold fast to it. Okay? All right. Just got a couple things in big letters that I must have thought at one point was important. So I'll give those to you. Law is a function of the covenant, not the way into it. All right? So I'll give you that. Law tells Israel how to live as God's image bearers and what it means and requires to live as a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So it's kind of like, here's how you tap into all this stuff. And then last one I'll give you. God calls Israel to keep the law, not in order to become God's people, but because they already are God's people. I've received you to myself. So here's how you live that out. Okay?